Okay, hi everyone. Nice to see you all today. My name's Debbie Connolly. Thank you for taking the interest in my talk today. So my background is in new product development, and I work for S&P Global as a data scientist. Today I'm going to talk to you a bit about our new sentiment product that we built out on the Databricks platform, all the way from a POC to a client-facing production application. Just before I get onto that. So I'm currently sharing a little bit of lung capacity, so if I need to take a breath at some point, please just excuse me for a couple of moments, but I'll get straight back into it. So as part of our presentation today, I'm going to take you a little bit through the development process, including our model training and the model selection. And then I'll talk a little bit about moving into the production steps and bringing all of those things together. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask that all questions be, we just wait to the end for those. There's some allotted time for questions at the end. Just a disclaimer from Databricks that says, don't believe anything I say. So, a quick introduction to S&P Global and market intelligence. Market intelligence is just one of 5 divisions of S&P Global. We are a leading market data provider to financial institutions, and Capital IQ Pro is our flagship data and research platform on which we have several 100,000 users. In terms of our news offering, we have about 100,000 users in the past 12 months of news. Our main clients that we see using it are research analysts, portfolio managers, investor relations, and those in account management roles. And we have thousands of news articles published every day on the platform from 3 different sources. So we have our internal market intelligence journalism team, and then we also have 2 external sources that you probably have heard of, the Dow Jones and the Nikkei News. So those 3 sources provide a global coverage of financial news for both public and private companies. And as we have such a huge volume of noise, our question to ourselves was, how can we help our clients on their search and discovery journey to find the relevant and important news to them? I've got a couple examples on the screen here of some news events. So for example, we've got a $1 billion settlement from Toyota. We've got a multi-billion-dollar merger and acquisition, and then we also have a delayed regulatory filing. So in terms of what we set out to build, we wanted to build 3 different products, each for slightly different use cases. So first, we wanted to build a front end for our existing business users of Cap IQ Pro, just to help them in that search and discovery journey that I've already spoken about, and drive usage of our news assets. We also wanted to build a quantitative data set and target a new audience with this. So we have quite a high demand for alternative data sets from our hedge fund clients, and this is actually exactly the type of data that they're looking for. And in the database, we have 1.5 million signals for 10,000 public companies. And finally, we wanted to build a sentiment model that was low cost to run, and that we could run a high volume of data through frequently, because news is published every minute, and very quickly. So we wanted to make the model available to our clients outside of the application as well, so that users could test out the model on their own texts or in their own applications. So we also wanted to host the model on Databricks Model-Serving. So that lets us set up the model as an API endpoint, and they can just query the model on demand. Okay, so to take you through our approach a little bit, I have a demo application here, just because it is, there's lots of moving parts. So this application was built just for the purposes of this presentation. So let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see everything. So I think that's big enough. Okay, so we have up here the raw news article that we're taking. And news is quite different to other textual data. So, such as like earnings calls, transcripts, or broker research, in that it's often much less structured. We also pull news in from multiple different sources. So if it's been through a translation process, it can also be quite messy. News can also talk about multiple different topics and multiple different subjects. You know, it's not specific like perhaps an earnings call transcript is. So the first step after some data cleaning is entity recognition and sentence tokenization. At Market Intelligence, we have a really mature companies data set covering tens of thousands of public and private companies. And we also have a well-established entity linking product that's called NERD. So we use NERD for our entity recognition step. And it's also available to clients if any of you are interested in that product. And then the sentence tokenization process breaks the article up, and the objective of that is hopefully we get some sentences that are a bit more narrow in their scope in terms of topic and the entities that are mentioned in them. You can see here the highlighted sentences, those are the ones that are company-specific sentences. So once we have a set of company-specific sentences, we can run them through our models. We actually have 4 different models that we've set up, and they are, you can see them in the table below. I'll go through each of them in detail, but they are the is subject model, the sentiment model, the importance model, and then the news categorization model. Okay, so in the first sentence that was detected, so Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, the world's largest contract manufacturer, posted a 36% increase in profits to a record high, reported by Reuters. So our entity recognition process detected these 2 texts within that sentence and matched them to some entities in our company's data set. And then the first model, the is subject, predicts whether or not that company is the subject of the sentence. And you can see here that correctly Reuters is just the analyst. It's been predicted as false. So in our production application, we use this model just to filter out all of those instances of false. You know, we don't want to associate any signals with these companies that aren't the subject. The second model, which is our sentiment model and the focus of our talk, is a multi-classifier model, and it predicts the probability that a sentence is one of 3 classes, so positive, neutral, and negative. And then from those probability scores, we're able to calculate like a more human-readable polarity score that you see here, so from -1 to +1. So we've got some positive sentences, and then we've got one down here that's a negative sentiment for Alibaba. Stagnation of Chinese economy will have a negative impact. Thirdly, we have an importance model. So the aim of this model was to just surface the most important news to our clients. And it aims to answer the question, how important is this statement to a financial analyst? Sorry, let me scroll down a bit so you can see that a bit better. So here's an example of one that's been given a very low score for information about a company. And then our fourth model is a news categorization model designed to help users find specific news that they might be interested in. Let me scroll down so you can see a few more. So those categories are financial results, so for news about companies' profits or any other items that you might see on their balance sheet. We've got external factors for news such as unemployment, inflation, or supply chain disruptions, things like that. And then we have strategy and partnerships for news perhaps about mergers and acquisitions. And then we also have products and services for product announcements. So that was a super quick rundown into how we process an article and get company signals. So just to recap, data cleaning, entity recognition, sentence tokenization, and then we've got these company-specific sentences that we can run through our models. So next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the development process, specifically in the model training and model selection. So there is a trade-off between your model's complexity and the model, and then the cost to train and run your model. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the interesting things that we found there and some of the decisions that we made. I'm just going to talk about our sentiment model, as it's the focus of our product today, but same principles apply to all four, sorry. So some examples of some sentences. So these sentences are all representative of some issues that we needed our model to solve. You can see in the first example, the sentence contains some domain-specific language. So this is sort of representative of the majority of sentences that's in our data set. You know, they contain niche financial terms or acronyms that our model needs to understand both the context as well as like the directionality of that term. So here the model needs to know that low net non-performing loans is a good thing. The second sentence, it also contains some domain-specific language, but it's flagged here because it contains multiple different entities in different ways. And this shows how the model needs to understand subject relative sentiment, so that this is bad news for Credit Suisse, but good news for the other banks. And finally, the third sentence mentions some environmental issues where a mine has been shut down due to the presence of chinchillas. This is the matter of opinion, and just shows how that starts to enter the picture in sentiment analysis. A great visualization here, I'm sure you'll all agree. But unfortunately for the chinchillas, we need a model that's purely capitalist. We want a model that determines sentiment from the point of view of profitability of the company. So, yeah, bad news for the chinchillas, but the gold needs to win this one. Okay, so going back to the model, the trade-off between your model's complexity and model cost. So we had a backfill of around 1.5 million sentences that we needed to process, and we had 4 different tasks that we wanted to execute on them. So running those through one of the frontier models would have considerable cost as well as processing time. So we went ahead with using training data from our internal financial analysts, who very kindly labeled a lot of sentences for us. And we trained a selection of models. And we chose Google's Fland's T5 Large from that selection, as it had the best accuracy after training. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the model, but T5 Flan is a text-to-text model, so we had to add a classifier head on top of this so that we could output probabilities rather than text. Oh, sorry. Okay, so by training our own model, we have like a considerable benefit. So I've put them on the slide here, but firstly, as the model is relatively small, Flan Large is just under 3 gigabytes. We can run this really cheaply and quickly. We also found that we could easily teach the model new topics. We needed as few as 10 sentences for each label to actually allow the model to learn that topic. Some of the smaller models, so perhaps like BERT, lots of people use that for sentiment analysis. In comparison, that's like 400 megabytes. We found that we hit a limit really quickly on the topics that we could teach that. So thirdly, since we trained it ourselves using our own training data, it reliably shares our own opinion of the labels. We actually found with some of the frontier models when we were testing this out, that they often quite struggled with some of the ESG and environmental issues. And on the subject of opinion, we actually found that quite a lot of some of those sentences that are subtle in their sentiment, even there was some disagreement between our financial analysts labeling the data. So in our training data, each sentence was labeled multiple times, and we took the majority of the labels. But yeah, it's just, sentiment is subjective at the end of the day. So finally, more of a business perspective benefit, but training data that's super niche and super accurate is really valuable. And as this model is trained on our own data, the model itself is proprietary and something that we can actually look to monetize. In terms of the trade-off and some of the negatives, so we can't execute some of those more complex tasks. So the subject relative sentiment, where there's multiple subjects being talked about in different ways, we can't do that with this model. But as these sentences are more of a case scenario and not really the aim of our product, we came to terms with that one. Secondly, we can't ask for reasoning, so we don't have that text output. And even though that's useful for some use cases, we really wanted a quantitative output, so we weren't too bothered about that one. And then finally, it won't immediately understand domain-specific language without training. So if there were terms that we missed in our training data, or if there's some new language coming out, some new technical terms perhaps, we would need to retrain our model. So because our data is, it mostly contains well-established financial terms, we weren't that worried that we missed any domain-specific language, but we'd be more than happy to retrain our model because it's relatively low cost to do so anyway. Okay, so on to bringing these pieces together into a production pipeline. So we have a daily ETL process that processes any newly published articles. The ETL is summarized into these 3 steps. The first 2 that you're familiar with, although you can see from the screenshot of the workflow on Databricks, it is a little bit more complicated than just these 3 steps. But entity recognition and sentence tokenization to get our company-specific sentences, our model inference, and then we do some signal processing and some curating of our gold tables for our final application. Okay, very quickly, for those of you that like an architecture diagram, but for those of you that don't, lots of you like an architecture diagram, great. But for those of you that don't, I have the demo coming up in just a few moments. So just bear with me for a couple more minutes. So you can see the transition that we have from the bronze layer down here. I do have a pointer. As we pull in the raw news from our 3 sources. So running that entity recognition, the sentence tokenization to get our company sentences. Moving into the silver layer as we run our 4 models, the is subject, the sentiment, the importance and the classification. And so this gives us our raw signals, and then moving into the gold layer as we do some signal processing and curation of our gold tables. So our application is a Plotly Dash app, which directly connects to the gold tables via serverless SQL warehouses. So that just pulls the data on demand in the application. And then each of our 4 models are also set up as on the model serving as API endpoints that can also be queried on demand. So I'd like to take you back to one of the original slides where I spoke about what we set out to build. So firstly, it was a front end that we wanted our business users to be able to use to help them on their search and discovery journey. We wanted a quantitative data set that we could target our quant users with. And then we wanted our proprietary models set up as APIs to be used by users on their own texts. Okay, on to the good bit, the live demo. So our application is in production in the Capital IQ Pro platform. Let me just zoom in a little bit. That's good. So for those of you who are existing clients, you will already have access. There's a link in my slides. You can, please go have a look at it. So the front end, just as a reminder, was built to help clients on their search and discovery journey. And displays news in a totally different way to the existing product. And there's lots of different ways that you can interact with this application. So the first page, the market overview page, provides sort of a home page for news over the past 7 days. Financial news is actually positively biased, mainly just due to the volume of news that we get from investor relations, reporting favorably about themselves, really. But we can see how each sector has been performing in comparison to one another. We can see that the consumer discretionary sector hasn't really been performing that well, probably likely due to some of the recent news with tariffs and inflationary pressures. But we can click through into each of these news categories, one of the outputs of our models. And we can see how these things change. So external factors, pretty much the same. Financial results, a little bit more negative. And then when we get onto the products and the services, these are nearly always positive. Like I said, these are mostly news coming from investor relations. So the grid below shows the underlying data. So we have the article publish date, we've got the recognized entity, we've got the quote itself, the sentiment, and the categorization. From here, we can click into the Cap IQ Pro platform. If you are a user of Cap IQ, you will be familiar with this. So here we can go have a look at this company, see what further information there is. Or we can click into the originating article as well. So we also have some functionality over here on the right where we can collect some feedback from our users. This was really important to me because, as I mentioned earlier, I really wanted to collect data from our users when the model was incorrect. So they can either upvote this or downvote it. So this is what happens when you downvote, and they can either provide the correct sentiment or the correct importance. And then also how easy it was. So like lots of these sentences, like I said, will be ambiguous or not possible to determine. So yeah, we would use this to retrain the model and continuously improve our models. Okay, so let's say I am a technology analyst looking for some news. So I can click on the sector. And I can quickly order by the sentiment. So I can go look for some negative news here. I can see that Samsung, they've had an operating loss larger than the consensus. You can see that Apple has been downgraded. Lots of things for me to explore here. I can also search for a specific company. So say I want to find out more information about Samsung. I can type that in here. I can see all the different articles that are coming out. So we've got 20 articles in the past, well, 20 quotes in the past 7 days. Perhaps I'm interested in a specific term. I can have a look at that. So perhaps tariffs. I can see that Apple are adversely affected by some tariffs. I mean, they're taking up the whole page. But let's look at some companies that have been positively affected. Yeah, NVIDIA, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing. They're expecting a record profit despite the tariffs. So that's the home page, and like I said, it can be used in many different ways. Moving on to the second page. So the company sentiment page lets us do a bit more of a deeper dive into the news of a specific company. I'm just going to look. So let's take a look at BYD, the Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer. So we generate a time series. I did quickly mention the signal processing step that happened in our gold table, in our gold layer. But we create this time series. So all of the articles have gone into this overall sentiment, and then we also break it out by each of those news classes. So the time series is plotted on the left-hand side, and then the quotes themselves, all these dots, are plotted on the on the right-hand side. The size of these articles is proportional to the importance. So that's one of the outputs of one of our other models. And just looking at this as a quick glance, I can see that BYD, they've had some really good news in their financial results. I can see their products and services, really good news there as well, but I can see that their external factors has been going down quite quickly. So external factors, I mean, I'm thinking for BYD, that's probably due to some inflationary pressures, perhaps in a weakening of the Chinese economy. Perhaps some EU tariffs coming in there, but we can have a look at each of these articles by clicking on them. So this one here, yeah. So we've got some disinflationary pressures, BYD cutting prices, and yeah, we can quickly go through and look at that originating article. Going back, let me just take that article off. So we order the grid at the bottom just by the date and then the sentiment, but I can look at all the articles that have been published in the past day. We've got lots of articles coming in. Yeah, mostly about price cuts coming in. Yeah. Okay, so I'd just like to say that without the time series, if we're looking at this, it's a little bit difficult to work out what the overall trend of the company is. There's just so much news. So I'm going to look at a company that has even more news than BYD. Let's have a look at Tesla, as we can all imagine is going to be huge. I did have a look this morning, and Tesla actually had over 100 signals just today. But again, we can quickly see just from this time series, there's a lot of external factors coming into play here, as well as some of their financial results last year. And yeah, you can just see how this data set is particularly valuable as an alternative data set to our quant clients. I also find it really easy to find events through this page. Another example that I was looking at was CrowdStrike. So not a lot of reporting going on just before their outage last year, but you can see here the huge influx, followed by some negative sentiment in their financial results. here and have a look at those articles. So that's it for the demo. In terms of outcomes and next steps, we've seen clients use the application in a lot of different ways. So some users return to the app every single day and just look at the same company every day. And other users are looking by sector. They're doing a bit more research and spending some time there. But we have a very high retention rate of 75%. So our users are continually returning to the platform. And we have a 22-minute average session time, so people are browsing the news. For next steps, apart from actually releasing some of these free features into the news product itself, I've shown how the application is really good at showing those events and the inflection points. I think if we were able to programmatically detect those and in turn build a notification service for our clients, that would be highly valuable. I also think that we could build different sentiment models for different personas. So the obvious ones are the bull versus the bear, but you could have sentiment models for people that are environmentalist investors. So for those chinchillas, you've got to have somebody representing them. And then finally, you can see that there's still a huge amount of news in the application. So I think we need an additional model that would be able to detect forward-looking statements. A lot of the news is just news about news, stock price went up. So if we were able to build a model that could extract the really valuable sentences, I think that would be great. Oh, and in terms of takeaways from my presentation today, the main point would be that our models, even though that they're smaller, our smaller models, they're trained on highly specific tasks, right? But they're running at a very low cost, and they can more than compete with some of the frontier models. So I think we should still keep considering those. We've invested heavily in curating that training data, but in return, our ETL and our application costs are less than a coffee a day. So yeah, thank you for your time today. Any questions from the floor?